You're listening to Tips and Tools for Teachers.
I'm Joella Hallam, here with Jessica Poulter, and we're in the studio today with Dr. Lary Duque. Today we're going to talk to him about creating multicultural classrooms. Dr. Duque taught elementary in California for 20 years. The last 5 to 7 years while he was teaching elementary, he got his PhD at UC Davis. He also was an adjunct teacher and lecturer for UC Davis and Cal State University during that time. So, Dr. Duque, thank you for spending some time with us today, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Perfect. So, Dr. Duque, really quick, can you give us a little bit of your background of when you came here to the United States and what that experience was like for you?
Sure. I came here in 1960. I was about 5 years old when we came here, and I didn't speak English, and so much of my memory of growing up is pretty blank because I was learning how to speak English and trying to maneuver my way through school and so forth. So I really don't recall much of my childhood other than little snippets. But other than that, we lived and we came to California, and then because my father was in the United States Navy, we lived for a bit in Connecticut, and then South Carolina, and then back to California, and so different places. And then eventually I grew up in the late 60s in Vallejo, California.
Did you have any experiences as a young child where you felt discriminated in the school system or left out?
Well, that's a great question. So, it's an interesting thing about not speaking English and so when I came to elementary school, I didn't speak any English, but it was the old sink or swim mentality of the kind of schools I went to. It's either you survived or you didn't. Either you sank or you swam. And as a result, there were holes in my education. So, for example, I didn't participate in the music program in elementary school. Typically in third grade or fourth grade is when kids become part of a music program. And I failed the music test. And the reason why is because I didn't a high note and a low note. I didn't know what those words meant. And so as a result, I didn't participate in school band. So that's strange memories of things, okay? But those are things that stand out. Whereas my brothers and sisters, I've got brothers and sisters who are accomplished musicians and concert pianists and so forth, but I'm the only one because of my age when I came here.
So Dr. Duque, those experiences you had as a young student not knowing English and sinking or swimming in the classroom, did that influence how you treated or approached students in your classroom who came from different diverse cultures?
Yeah, it did, because of my experiences, that really influenced the type of research I did as a doctoral student. And I was always curious about that relationship between parents and the schools and how the culture at home impacts the culture at school and vice versa. And so I was very sensitive about those sort of things as a classroom teacher. So where I taught in California, so one of the school districts I taught in California is the Davis Joint Unified School District in Davis, California, where UC Davis is located. And in those classrooms, I had 5 to 7 different languages in my classroom. But what was really intriguing, though, is that those kids, moms and dads, were professors at UC Davis. And for many of those kids English was not spoken at home, and they learned English at school. And I was really sensitive to those sort of things. And so I knew that those kids, although they were really smart, they also had some sort of language deficiencies or language skills that they needed to develop. A lot of it was like in talking and in reading and talking and writing. they read really well, but it was the talking and the writing that you could see conflicts. And so I did things in my classroom to address those situations. So I provided opportunities for kids to do a lot of talking. So my classrooms tend to be pretty noisy because I encouraged kids to talk, and I encouraged kids to write. They did a lot of writing. The reading was no issue because the kids already read, but it was the reading, it was the talking and the writing. I recently, last year, I got an email from a former student of mine. She reconnected with me through Facebook. She saw me there, and she sent me a message, and she found out that I was teaching here, and she sent me an email. And she was telling me about what she was doing. She is now an ophthalmologist, and her brother's also an ophthalmologist. And their family, she grew up speaking Farsi, and her parents are both professors. And she said she wanted to thank me for a few things, but she said primarily, she wanted to thank me for the way I treated her. She said, as a fourth grade kid, said I was the first teacher who ever recognized that she was smart and that her parents were smart, despite the fact that they had accents. And that was pretty powerful. And, you think about those kids and think about the experiences I had of growing up in Vallejo, California, where there was a large population of Black Americans. A lot of those boys I went to school with, these African American boys I grew up with, were always put into special ed programs. And now, as I find out about what they're doing with their lives, they're 67-year-old. I'm 67 years old, and some of those little black boys who are put in special ed programs, they're professionals. They're doctors, dentists, lawyers, managers, and their children are doing really well. So there's something that I remember those experiences as a kid that greatly influenced my research and my attitudes about children.
And so as teachers, we need to really be mindful that we aren't putting a label on a student that's associated in any way with an ethnicity.
Yeah, and that's an issue that we all have. We all have our biases. That's just who we are as human beings. And that as classroom teachers, we have to be aware of those biases and be aware of those situations we're in. One of the things that I've always encouraged my classroom, my students to do is to make sure that they do things like visit homes, get to know families, and so forth. And sometimes people will say, like, their house smells funny. Well, it's because it's the food. It's different food. And probably the things that we can do as classroom teachers, one of the best things we can do is educate ourselves by going out to places and eating foods that are different than what we're used to get those smells. And so that's some of the things that I think about.
What methods would you say that you used to be inclusive to those students like her?
Yeah, those are always fun because now we're talking about what do I do to differentiate the instruction. We know that from Carol Tomlinson, who is probably the pioneer in differentiated instruction, that we need to consider to differentiate instructions by either the content, the stuff that the kids actually learn, the process, how they learn the stuff, product, how they show that they've mastered something, and definitely our learning environment. So one of the things that I always found that was the most powerful way to help kids learn, especially kids who speak another language other than English or who are unfamiliar with school, is that we have to differentiate our learning environment. For many of us, school was straight rows and sit by yourself. And we find that really isn't developmentally appropriate for many kids. Kids are social beings. They want to be around people. I have this old saying, they're going to talk anyway, so you might as well get them to talk about things you want them to talk about. And so that's what you need to do. So you differentiate the learning environment by putting kids into groups of 4s and providing experiences where they have to talk about things, and you get them talking about things. So as a rule, as a general description of my classrooms were noisy because kids were talking. My kids and my kids moved around and did stuff. And I remember one time having one student be teaching a lesson. He would get up and just start wandering around, walking the perimeter of the classroom. And I just thought, well, that's really strange. Why can't this kid sit down? And so finally I realized, oh, maybe he just needs it. And he was getting his work done, and it stayed out of trouble, so I was fine. He would just be moving around, walking around. And then one day I was doing a presentation to the whole school community, and I'm talking to about 300 parents. Then out of the corner of my eye, I see this little kid's father. And what does his father do? His father walks around the perimeter of the gymnasium while I'm talking. So I said, oh, okay, this is just culturally what happens in their family. They just walk around. That little boy now is a prosecuting attorney. So I just figured, okay, I can just see this kid walking in front of a jury, gesticulating and walking around, waving his arms and talking. So it is. You have to understand kids. You have to understand who they are. And that's one thing Tomlinson would say about differentiating, is that you have to know your kids. You got to know who they are culturally. You got to know their strengths, their weaknesses, their interests. And that comes from talking to kids and being around kids. And then that way you can differentiate instruction. Okay.
Before this podcast, you shared a really fun story about some monk girls who were failing the sewing lab. Would you mind resharing that with our audience? Because
sure.
I think it's a great example of differentiating.
Sure. So I was doing research in an area of California called West Sacramento. West Sacramento has a large refugee population of Hmong speakers and Russian speakers. And I was doing research at a junior high school there, and I went to go visit with the teacher where my research was located, and she told me about 3 little Hmong girls who were failing sewing. And I said, oh. And she wanted to know if I could help them. I said, I don't know anything about sewing, but sure, I'm sure I could help them, whatever they might need help with. And so these little girls were a little late coming back to class. And so eventually when they came back to class, I pulled them aside, and I told them I was here to help them with with any of their homework and schoolwork, and in particular anything in their home economics class. And so we sat down at the table in the back, and they pulled out their work for home economics. And the reason why they were failing, it turned out, is because they couldn't complete the worksheet, this crossword puzzle worksheet about different parts of the sewing machine. And they weren't allowed to have access to the sewing machine until they could fill out the puzzle. And so I don't know anything about sewing machines, but figured I know how to look up things in a dictionary and use an encyclopedia. So the 4 of us sat down, and we just went through and started naming I told them all the different names and how to fill it out. Went through that. And after we finished, I asked them, so why were you late to class today, coming back to your homeroom? And they opened up out of their pocket, they pulled out this wad of $20 bills. And I asked them, where in the world did you get that money? And they all started giggling. They said, oh, we were selling sewing pieces to our teacher. I said, who did the sewing? He said, oh, our mothers and we did, and our mothers did. The Hmong have this great tradition of needlework. And so I thought, I just started laughing, thinking, okay, here are these girls who know how to embroider, who know how to use a needle and thread and so forth, and they're failing sewing. And the reason why they were failing sewing is because they couldn't fill out that ridiculous crossword puzzle. And so I just thought that was the funniest thing.
And so if they had just been accommodated with some assistance, or that part of the lesson plan was adjusted, they would have been successful.
So they had to. So it's Tomlinson would say that the teacher needed to differentiate the content, so that the kids would be able to receive the information they needed, so that they could fill out that sewing machine, so they know the parts. That's all they needed to do, because obviously they could they could sew. They just needed to learn the parts of a sewing machine, and so that they could use it.
Kind of shifting gears here, it sounds like some of the students have teachers who don't believe in them or who think they're not intelligent enough for their classes. How could we avoid offending these students in our classrooms? And if we have, how would we repair that?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think I offend kids every day in classes here at BYU, but I keep trying. One of the things that we need to always understand about people is that we're all different. And I always ask my students, what's the most politically correct thing we can do? And everybody always has these definitions about being politically correct. And I try to help kids understand that the most politically correct thing we can do is to help every child become their very best. And so what we need to understand is that we need to educate ourselves to understand people. That's the first thing. So I really believe it's important for teachers to spend time with the families. I think it's important for them to spend time with children and just talking to kids and finding out who they are. So one of the things I always did as a classroom teacher at the beginning of the school years, I would always have a family potluck. I would invite the families, the parents, and the kids, and so forth. And we would have a potluck before the start of school. I got to know so many families that way and get to know them. And they got to know me as a human being. And plus, you get to go home with all sorts of leftovers, so that's always fun. I think that's an important thing, to just do that, to get to know people. We have to understand that it's about respecting people, and that's probably the most important thing we can ever do, is learn to respect. Years ago, we used to hear the word tolerant. We have to tolerate people, and I don't know about you, but that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. When I tolerate people, it means I'm just putting up with you, and I don't think we want people to just put up with us. That doesn't feel right. I think what we want is for people to respect us and to recognize that we're human beings. And I think that's an important thing. That's what I think for anybody who wants to be a school teacher, that's what you need to do more than anything else. Get to know your people, learn to love them, and to respect who they are as human beings. That's a helpful thing you can do.
Some of the examples we've studied about as far as creating multicultural classrooms is by doing cultural fairs where the student can present their culture, or a project around cultures. I feel like as a teacher, you did that with the parents and students before class, that your sessions ever began. Did you ever integrate any of those practices in your classroom, and was it successful?
Yeah. The typical way that we experience multicultural education, I labeled it, I created this term for it. It's called the 5 F's. And the 5 F's stand for fun, food, fiesta, focus on making safe heroes, and focus on differences. That's typically the way most people experience multicultural education. The issue with that is that it becomes very tourist-like, and it becomes very, very superficial. So when you think about Cinco de Mayo, what do you think about? Well, you think about having a party and eating Mexican food. Chinese New Year, you think about having egg rolls and fried rice. And those are, I love food, I love to eat food, but typically that's it when we talk about multicultural education. Multicultural education, to be really powerful, is something that should happen constantly. It should experience constantly. So, for example, we have right now Black History Month, month of February. Well, that's it? I mean, there aren't any other times that we can talk about people, because certainly there's interesting things happening all the time. So to be truly multicultural, it needs to be pervasive. It needs to be a process of learning and growing. It needs to be about tackling inequality. It's about raising achievement in all children. It means providing an apprenticeship where every child has the opportunity to learn and grow, to become critical thinkers, and to learn to be members of a democratic society. So as a classroom teacher, what I tried to do is that I didn't try to experience it. I didn't provide that experience where, your mom's from Norway, so today this week we're going to have Norwegian week, and your grandma's going to come in here and tell us all about what it's like to be a Norwegian. See, to me, that's very superficial. What I try to do instead is provide opportunities for children to see human beings as who they are, and to be able to share who they are with everybody else. And that's an ongoing process. And so everything was always connected to who are we as human beings? What do human beings need to be able to thrive and experience life, and to be fulfilled and experience things like that? And so I didn't have cultural fairs because I felt that it was too narrow of a scope. What I had instead was opportunities for kids to just be themselves. And if that meant sharing something from their home life, that's fine. But it wasn't just a special day for them. It was an ongoing process. And if kids had special experiences where it happens to be their family experienced Chinese New Year, then we would say, let's do it. Let's just experience and let's learn about it, and let's have an enjoyable time about it. Let's learn about each other. Truly multicultural education is about dealing with issues, and about seeing that human beings have issues, and that we as human beings have to figure these things out. So in my classroom, we didn't stay away from difficult topics. We dealt with difficult topics. We dealt with those things, and we talked about them. We read books that some people might say were on the banned book list, because those books are important. We made sure the language is clean, but we made sure we talked about them, and we dealt with those things, because that's part of the challenges we all have.
So you were able to approach multiculturalism in a very natural and safe classroom environment.
We tried. That's the whole thing, because it's all about trying to treat people with respect and fairness and with love. And so that's all part of what it's all about.
Dr. Duque, I hope that I can implement all of these things into my future classrooms. But as a new teacher starting off, it might be overwhelming to try to do all of these things. What would your advice be for a brand new teacher going out into the field to develop an effective multicultural classroom?
What a great question. I think we have to recognize, first of all, a couple of things. I think we have to sit down and really recognize our biases, to really recognize what are the things that, just to see what things kind of turn us off, what things bother us, and recognize that they're there. Okay? I think that's the first start. I think we really have to educate ourselves a little bit. And we can do it by really fun ways, by just going out and eating foods that we're not used to. That's an easy thing we can do, okay? I think it's important that we read books, different stories about people, about children and their experiences, and different experiences they've had. So, for example, just reading some of the Newbery award-winning books are about children who are facing challenges and how they go through it. I think those are powerful things. I think it's important that we do our own research from really good places where we can learn about things. So, for example, there's resources like from readingrockets.org or resilienteducator.com. Those are some great places that are really reputable people, researchers and writers, and experienced educators who can give you lots of cool resources. I think that's really helpful. I think looking into Carol Tomlinson and reading her work about differentiated instruction can give you those sort of things, those kind of strategies you need, because that will help you as a classroom teacher have those tools that you need. But those tools need to be related to principles of good teaching. And that's important. Because as a new teacher, you're going to be attending a lot of in-service training and so forth, and those people they bring in, they make thousands of dollars an hour because they know how to sell things and so forth, and they say, we're going to give you these tools to put on your tool belt and so forth. And what you'll do as a classroom teacher is that you'll go try those out and then not ever use them again. And a lot of it's because those tools or applications aren't related to true principles of teaching and learning. And that's really important, because then if you can do that, if you can line those up with real true things and analyze them, then you have a better chance of having those tools. Okay? So for example, differentiated instruction is a tool, but it's a tool based on true principles of teaching. We want our kids to be diligent learners. Okay? So how do I help my kids become diligent learners? By providing them with opportunities to express themselves and to learn information in different ways. Thus, differentiated instruction is connected to true principles of teaching. So that's what you have to try to do. It's part of the fun. I'm envious of you kids.
Dr. Duque, we really appreciate your experience, your advice, all the wonderful things you've been able to share with us today. And I know that those will help us as we strive to become new and better teachers. And again, we just want to thank you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much. It was enjoyable.